Missouri GOP renews push to limit transgender athlete participation in school sports. Again, with the trans sports thing, as far as I'm aware, like the number of transgender people that actively participate in sports is also a very minimal fragment of the trans community. That was my understanding, anyway. That was the understanding I had going into this. But everyone deserves the right to participate in sports if they want to. Again, personally, not my dig. Not a fan of sports. Again, unless it's a competitive Pokemon team, that is the kind of sport that you need me on your team. But if we're talking like even golf or like ultimate frisbee or something like that, just leave me out of it. Put me on the bench, coach. You don't want me on your team. Okay. Efforts to ban transgender girls from competing in women's sports are expected to pick up momentum when lawmakers return to the Capitol in January. You notice how it's always focused on trans women, right? The subject of trans men never really gets brought up when it comes to these arguments about trans people in sports. They kind of get left by the wayside. Trans men, honestly, they get left by the wayside in a lot of discourse, honestly. And it's kind of sad. There needs to be more representation for trans men, which is why I encourage everyone to go check out my friend Goddammit Malcolm. I think that's the name he uses. He's a great representative for trans men in our community. He likes to have these trans mask panels and a lot of different transgender men voices on there, so it's definitely something to look into. Okay, there have been more bills pre-filed for Missouri's 2023 legislative session regarding transgender athletes than there are transgender athletes currently competing, according to their identity, in public schools. Like I fucking said. Republican lawmakers in both the House and Senate have combined to file 10 bills seeking to restrict the ability of transgender minors to play in youth sports. In the 2021-2022 school year, only 5 transgender students applied to the Missouri State High School Athletics Association, or MSHA, to compete according to their gender identity. Democrats and LGBTQ advocates say the flurry of bills is a discriminatory attack on an already marginalized community motivated by partisan politics. That's exactly what it is. GOP lawmakers pushing the bills, many of which are titled Protect Women's Sports Act, say they are inspired by real concerns in their communities about fairness. It's a debate that played out repeatedly during the 2022 session as Republicans pushed and Democrats stalled numerous bills targeting transgender youth. Ultimately, dysfunction in the Senate doomed their chances. Senator Mike Moon, Republican of Ash Grove, and among the legislation's most outspoken proponents, says he's optimistic things will be different in 2023. That sentence is really poorly worded. I think there's a typo there. He points to Governor Mike Parson's support for his bill after the legislature adjourned in May. After the session ended, the governor's office voiced support for the bill, Moon said, and whether that was the catalyst or not, I don't know, but this year now several lawmakers have filed it, and perhaps that will create enough support that it will pass. Isn't it easy, after a legislative session ends, to voice support for bills that didn't pass? Isn't that a really easy way to kind of like signal to your base that this is... It just seems like a total empty gesture, in my opinion. I don't know. I'm not a politician. I don't know the deals about this, but that's, from an outsider's perspective, it doesn't seem like you're really doing anything there, you know? Missouri governor laments failure of transgender sports bill ban on critical race theory. Meanwhile, opponents are gearing up for the fight. High school is hard enough, and it's hard enough to fit in for students who already feel some kind of uniqueness or reason that they have to try a little bit harder to fit in with their peers. said Shira Berkowitz, a senior director of public policy and advocacy for Promo, the state's largest LGBTQ advocacy organization. They face higher rates of bullying, they face harassment and mistreatment sometimes, and the fact that they could be excluded from sports has a devastating effect already in a vulnerable population, Berkowitz said. Patrick Sasser testified in front of a House committee in March in hopes that his 11-year-old daughter could compete in sports according to her gender identity. She's been denied access to some all-girls teams as she competes in multiple sports, he told the Missouri Independent in an interview. But her current teammates welcome her as just another athlete there to kick the soccer ball and hopefully score a few points, he said. Yeah, leave it up to the team. Like, what? Anyway. But his daughter's transition has not been without tears. The things that my 11-year-old has experienced in life, no kid should have to experience. A lot of those things, and no kid should have to experience a lot of those things and be uncomfortable in their own body and have doubts or fears or anything like that. No kid should have to go through that, he said. The notion that someone would do that to dominate a sport, it's just like crazy to me. Yeah, that's the thing. That's the thing. The notion that people would put themselves through transition, through this social torture, just to dominate at sports, when it's even proven that transgender athletes often lose to cisgender opponents, like, anyway. MSHSAA's application what a terrible, you need to rename that. That is awful. The application process for transgender athletes has been in place since 2012 and is more restrictive for transgender females who wish to compete on girls' teams. They can only compete according to their gender identity once they have been taking hormone suppression medication for 1 year and must prove they are staying on their treatment to remain eligible. Since MSHA has begun this process in 2012, there have been 12 students who applied and approved, said Jason West, MSHA's communications director. State Senator Denny Hoskins, a Republican from Warrensburg and a sponsor of one of the versions of the Save Women's Sports Act bills, said he was not aware of the regulations. After being told the current rules for Missouri's high school athletes, he called the process a good start, but said to have a real impact, any policy needs to be in state law. We can do more and put something in state statute, Hoskins said. 18 states have banned transgender students from competing according to their gender identity since March 2020. According to a Pew Research survey, 58% of Americans said they favored or strongly favored policies that limit transgender athletes' participation to the sex they were assigned at birth. They've been contacted by parents who have daughters. They worked hard to develop the skills they've attained and also to win over the scholarships they want. And they believe having a biological male compete against them in competitive sport is unfair, Moon said. Well, maybe you should get better. Just saying. He said none of those families recounted a time their daughter competed against a transgender athlete. Sasser believes GOP bills are tapping into people's fears and biases. That's why the legislators feel forced to take a stand on something I don't believe to be an issue, he said. Representative Ian Mackey, Democrat from Richmond Heights, believes opponents will be able to defeat the bill this year. There's always going to be something more pressing, something that actually requires our attention, and I hope we'll get in the way and that will cause us to do the jobs that we were sent there to do. Which is bring resources back to our districts, improve the livelihood of our families and communities, provide healthcare and education for Missourians. He believes most people that get involved in anti-trans legislation don't understand what it means to be transgender. Ah, wow. You mean like a bunch of cis people talking about trans policy? Yeah, whoa, that blows my mind. It's amazing. Yeah, I totally agree with that. A lot of people that are participating in this legislation and trying to fight against trans rights and stuff like that, they just don't understand. They don't have that perspective. They don't know what it's like to be trans. So I totally agree with that. Berkowitz said the anti-trans legislation is emotionally damaging. The damage that these types of messages and bills perpetuates in our schools and classrooms and the physical activities that our kids participate in does cause significant harm, Berkowitz said. The mental toll causes transgender athletes to opt out of sports they'd otherwise enjoy, Berkowitz said. For Sasser and his family, who have repeatedly testified against this legislation, it is emotionally draining. It's a really tough fight and a really tough thing to feel like I'm continually defending the identity of my own child and the identity of other trans people in the state and around the nation. Hoskins and Moon acknowledged their legislation could have negative mental health effects on trans athletes. We want to be cognizant of all mental health concerns of any youth, Hoskins said, whether they are transgender or not transgender. The 10 bills filed by mid-December have had various financial penalties for schools that allow transgender athletes to compete on the team of the opposite of their sex assigned at birth. Both Hoskins and Moon's bills take away all legislative directed funding until a school complies with their rules. That's pretty fucking sad. You're applying financial pressure to get a political point. That's just not right. That's just not fucking right. It's... Somebody said something here that I totally agree with. Yeah, here we go. This line right here. Very few people engaged in any of this discussion about any of this anti-trans legislation do not have that perspective. They do not know, they do not understand what it means to be transgender. That's true. That's 100% true.